Earthlings. Well, I bet that had you fooled, eh? I bet you thought I was an alien. Well, I'm not really, but I want to get straight on with the next section of this course, and it's to do with assumptions. There are two things that I want us to explain I want us to understand at the end of this film. Number one is what we mean by an assumption, and then I need you to understand the in a relatively simple way to start with, the assumptions of the four approaches that we will be studying in PY1. Now, what we know so far is that in our last video we had this chap here who got angry. He got angry with this chap here. So angry, in fact, that he hit him, and we saw that different psychologists explained that aggressive behaviour in different ways. Biologically, it's too much testosterone that caused it. From a behaviourist or a learning point of view, he had learned that you get rewarded if you behave in that kind of way, and so he carries on behaving in that kind of way. Psychodynamic, it might have been something to do with his early childhood. Cognitive approach would suggest that he's knocked the guy out because he's seen that as the most effective way of solving a problem. Okay, so that's the point we have here, is that the four different approaches look at behaviour in different ways. So an approach is the psychologist's point of view, if you like, is the point of view of behaviour. But the point of view of behaviour is based on assumptions, and we need to know what an assumption is. Now, assumptions are things that we believe to be true without feeling the need to prove them. They're like starting points for an explanation. And for many people, you could say that what assumptions are, they're the things that we think are so obvious that we don't need to prove them. We just want to get on with things. If we spent our whole life trying to prove everything that we believed in, we wouldn't have time to do anything. Okay, so assumptions are starting points where we say, okay, we think this is true. And you can probably imagine that from that point of view, there's quite a lot of potential for argument already. Anyway, an assumption is something that we believe to be true without really needing to prove it. Okay. So if we think about the different approaches that we're going to be looking at, they've got very different assumptions about behaviour and where it comes from. So behaviourists, for example, say that we learn our behaviour from our environment. So it's nothing to do with genes. It doesn't really matter what we're born with. It doesn't matter what's inside us. What really counts and what makes us the people we are and behave the way we do is because of the environment. We learn from the environment, and behaviours that are reinforced, behaviours that are rewarded in some way, we're more likely to repeat those, and that means that we're learning through conditioning, as we will see later, and also we're learning through association. We connect one response to a stimulus, and we learn those kind of connections, and that's another form of learning that behaviourists talk about. I'll have a little blank one there for you, just to tease you a little bit. Okay, next one. The psychodynamic approach is very different. The assumptions that the psychodynamic approach is based on is that there are three different parts of the mind. Freud called those the id, the ego, and the superego, and they develop at different times, and they're responsible for different things. I'm not going to say any more about that now, but that's a very important assumption. Another important assumption from Freud and in the psychodynamic approach is that the unconscious mind has a very important part to play in our behaviour, as does the very early experiences that we have in early childhood, things that we can't even remember. They shape the way that we behave later in life. The cognitive perspective is different again. It suggests that our behaviour is driven by thinking. Why do we behave the way we do? Because we think about it. It's also connected with this other belief that the mind is like a computer. We get input from our environment, we process it in our minds, and then we respond. So input, processing, and output, very like a computer. And finally, they see an important assumption for cognitive psychologists is that psychology is a science. And because it's a science, we should investigate behavior in a very scientific way. That's a good, I think it's a reasonable general introduction, very superficial to the first three approaches. I'm just going to speak very similarly about the biological approach because that is the one that we're going to be studying in depth in class. Okay, so biological approach, and for this one, let's focus on one thing at a time. Okay, so first of all, the first assumption of the biological approach is that behavior comes from inside, comes from the body, and that different parts of the brain cause different behaviors. So the front part of the brain, for example, is responsible for fine motor movements. So if I make a little movement like this, can you see this? Right over here. Yep, there we go. If I do this, so if I was to, for example, try and flatten a grain of rice. Oops, there we go. Oops, can you see it now? Oh no, it's flat. If I was to flatten a grain of rice, that would be the front part of my brain who'd be responsible for that. The back part of my brain is responsible for vision and processing vision. So different parts of the brain cause and process different behaviors. Another way of saying that is that different locations in the brain are responsible for different functions, and we call that, another way of saying that is localization of function. So that's something that we'll build on in class, is that different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions that we do. The most obvious one, and the one that you've probably heard quite a lot in lower school, of course, is that the left-hand side of the brain is responsible for the right-hand side of the body, and vice versa. Second assumption is that our behavior is influenced by chemicals in the brain called neurotransmitters, and depending on the level of neurotransmitters, our behavior can be affected. So a couple of examples of that is the neurotransmitter dopamine, and there's theories around suggesting that if we've got too much dopamine, or that if our brains are too sensitive to dopamine, then we're prone to schizophrenia. Serotonin, another one. Low levels of serotonin can lead to is connected with depression. So that's two assumptions regarding how biological influences can affect the brain. Third one is to do with something else that you'll be familiar with from biology and so forth, and it's the presence of hormones. So, for example, as we saw in the fight scene that we saw earlier on, testosterone is often regarded as being responsible for aggression, high levels, and estrogen is sometimes regarded as being responsible for mood swings and so forth during female menstruation. Okay, so hopefully we've covered exactly what we mean by an assumption. And we've got a brief idea of the kind of assumptions that each of the approaches is based on, and they're, as I've said, they're starting points for what comes on next. Okay, I'll see you later. Bye.